right?
It does, and for the most
remaining
part, the national security content should be bipartisan, but sometimes it veers, and sometimes they have to not applaud so they don't appear in any way to support any partisan position. Yet the president is their commander-in-chief.
Right.
He's in the chain. They are in the chain of command, that, so to speak, and they obviously have to salute Joe Biden because he's president.
Right. And obviously their presence, too, taking on such an important shade, given everything that we're seeing overseas. Justice Kavanaugh's third State of the Union speech, by the way. And here comes First Lady Jill Biden. Let's listen. Big hug there from the First Lady to the Ukrainian ambassador. And this is not a position with which she is unfamiliar, right? I mean, she has attended these in her capacity as the second lady in years past.
Yes.
And she was obviously here, again, for the address from President Biden last go-around. Not a formal State of the Union. This is the formal State of the Union speech. Very significant still, as these all are every year.
She's a teacher, too. I mean, I think that's going to be interesting as we think about what he says on COVID, how she responds. Does he point to her
Madam Speaker,
experience
the
there as well?
President's cabinet.
No, they want their job is for them of whether they should clap. You're right. And there are, you look at somebody like Tony Blinken, right? The Secretary of State who's coming in, who's shaking hands. Who knows, many of these people from his roles in different capacities elsewhere.
He was the staff director of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and of course, Secretary Austin, who was before that the CENTCOM commander, so he goes deep with a lot of these members as well. And those are the two guys who are managing the U.S. participation in the NATO alliance to stand up to Vladimir Putin.
I have to think that they've been consulting even, not just obviously on strategy and on tactics here, but with what we will hear from President Biden as he outlines his position and really takes on Vladimir Putin, as we expect him to do in this speech tonight, as he has done so far.
Yeah, especially because this was a speech that had to be revised and revised and revised as things in Eastern Europe continue to deteriorate. You know that the Secretary of State, the Defense Secretary are important figures, but at a time like this, they have become the core people that he's been interacting with and talking to in the last few days. And I will also say, talking earlier about sort of President Biden having to connect with people and tell a story, people who have covered Joe Biden know he can tell a story, only because of who he is, but also because of his own life experiences, having lost children, having lost a wife. He is someone who can dig deep and try to empathize with people in a way that others can't.
It's been really interesting watching so many of these cabinet members are former members of the House or have been. They're kind of embracing their colleagues in ways. You see Sheila Jackson-Lee really talking to lots of folks on the end. She's kind of one of those perennial line standers that likes to get into the mix there.
And those assigned seats are being unassigned. They made it to the aisle.
Yamiche Alcindor, Anna Palmer, Jeremy Bash, I want to thank you. I want to thank all of our panelists, all of our guests and reporters who have been with us. Our special coverage continues right now with an NBC News special report.
1 year into office, facing massive challenges at home and abroad. On the domestic front, record inflation causing prices to rise and the president's approval rating to drop. Overseas, Russia invading Ukraine, a conflict that could reshape the map of Europe. All this as the nation tries to emerge from a pandemic that's taken the lives of nearly 1 million Americans and widened political divisions. With the midterm elections only 8 months away, the president facing a sharply divided Congress in the House chamber tonight as he makes his case to lawmakers and the American people that the State of the Union is strong.
From NBC News, President Biden's State of the Union. Live from Washington, here are Lester Holt and Savannah Guthrie.
And good evening from Washington. I'm Savannah Guthrie here with Lester Holt. And just moments from now, President Joe Biden will enter the House chamber to give his first official State of the Union address. And it comes at a moment when the world is in crisis and on the precipice. Russia has invaded its neighbor Ukraine, shattering peace in Europe and unleashing a massive assault growing more brutal by the day. We're on the ground in Ukraine tonight as the world waits for what message President Biden will deliver to Americans, to Ukrainians, and to Moscow tonight.
And as always, issues here at home to grapple with. You've got the pandemic, rising inflation hitting Americans hard. Any moment now, we expect the sergeant at arms to announce the president's arrival. There's a big difference from last year, and that is the size of the crowd. All members of Congress were invited to attend tonight's address. And listen to this, masks are optional, something we have not seen since the start of the pandemic. Everyone in attendance was required to show a negative PCR test prior to entry. We're also seeing ramped up security tonight. The fencing that went up around the Capitol following the January 6th insurrection is back with National Guard troops on standby. I want to go right to NBC's chief White House correspondent, Peter Alexander. Peter, good evening.
Lester, good evening to you in Savannah. To be clear here, President Biden's aides say there is no question that this is a different speech than he would have been giving just a couple of weeks ago, punctuating one of the most consequential periods of his presidency in the midst of the Russian invasion, only days after announcing his pick to be the first black woman on the Supreme Court. This is a high-stakes balancing act. Ukraine, I'm told, will be a dominant theme. The president will try to demonstrate his leadership on one of the greatest threats to European stability since World War II, and to deliver a rebuke to Vladimir Putin for what he will call a premeditated and unprovoked war. And we have just learned tonight that the president will announce that the U.S. will close its airspace to Russian aircraft. Still, his challenge this evening, a job approval, as you note, that's at an all-time low. Americans dissatisfied with his handling of crime and immigration and inflation. Look for him to express empathy with those economic struggles, detailing how he's working to cut costs to help working families. And I'm going to be watching his tone tonight. In this deeply divided country, officials here are previewing what they call a unity agenda, focusing on priorities that have been historically bipartisan. And Lester and Savannah, just moments ago, we learned that the designated survivor during tonight's State of the Union will be the Commerce Secretary, Gina Raimondo.
All right, Peter, thank you. We want to turn now to our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel. He is in Ukraine's capital city of Kiev tonight, as we see some of the military members, General Milley, of course, in the House chamber tonight. We saw Tony Blinken. Richard, you are in Kiev. This is a city that is surrounded. Russian forces engaging in a 6-day brutal assault, one that is expected to get even worse as the days wear on. What is the situation you're seeing on the ground at this hour?
There is a lot of concern, particularly with what is happening in the city of Kharkiv, and people are worried that what is happening to the second city in this country could be the fate of Kiev. Kharkiv right now is completely surrounded by Russian forces. It is being attacked from the outside by Russian artillery, airstrikes, missiles, and then just a short while ago, according to Ukrainian intelligence, there was a Russian air assault into the city itself. And they worry that this pattern could repeat itself on a city twice its size, the city of Kiev, with first Russia encircling the city, then attacking it, and then landing troops inside. And just a short while ago, the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, made an appeal. He said that this country needs help, that without more assistance, it is not going to be able to confront Russia on its own. Up until now, the Ukrainian military has been able to keep the Russians at bay and has been putting up a heroic defense, but a new kind of tactic would be much more difficult.
And Richard, the president has entered the House chamber. We expect this walk to last quite a few minutes, as it often does. He'll greet some of the members of Congress, the assembled guests. We've seen several members of the Supreme Court, the cabinet. And again, no masks in the chamber tonight. Well, masks were optional, and many have chosen not to wear them. So we're starting to see that return to normalcy. We want to bring in NBC's political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, and our chief Washington correspondent, Andrea Mitchell.
And watching this, it struck me that it feels like we're about to see a wartime speech, but this country is not at war, but it is one that Americans certainly have followed with great interest and have, certainly felt the pain of some of the soul-crushing moments we've witnessed in that part of the world.
You know, it's interesting. The president actually has an opportunity tonight that I don't think he would have had 2 weeks ago, which is more people are going to tune into the speech. it's going to be a little less of a partisan audience. You know, the past few states of the Union have very much, you could almost feel, you see it, where, you know, if one party watches its president, the other party doesn't. Tonight, with the uncertainty of what's going on in Ukraine, the uncertainty of the threats from Putin, the president has an opportunity to talk to some people he hasn't perhaps been able to talk to in a while. Now, that's the challenge, of course, of this speech is to see if what he says penetrates the public. I think he's had a hard time penetrating and getting them to listen to what he has to say in domestic politics. I do think this is his wheelhouse. This is what he has, in some ways, been preparing his whole professional life for, is this moment to manage a crisis in Europe. So he's perhaps ready for this moment. And so the opportunity tonight to meet it.
And as I turn to you, Andrea, our chief foreign affairs correspondent, I mean, this is a moment for history. This is a moment where the president is likely to talk about the forces for democracy versus the forces of a dictator and set it in quite stark terms.
And he's hoping, as we see the president handing the speech, the text to the vice president, of course, and the Speaker of the House, he's hoping that all the Republican criticism that he did not move quickly enough to arm Ukraine will now be resolved because they have taken decisive action.
I have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
And Savannah, this could be a rare moment of bipartisanship. He's hoping the kind that he remembers, bipartisanship, politics stopping at the water's edge on foreign policy.
It's very blue and yellow out there already in that crowd. You can see there was a lot of blue and yellow among members.
And they're wearing pins, the Ukrainian flag with the U.S. flag.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you, General. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Please. Thank you so much. Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President, our First Lady and Second Gentleman, members of Congress and the Cabinet, Justices of the Supreme Court, my fellow Americans. Last year, COVID-19 kept us apart. This year, we're finally together again. Tonight, we meet as Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, but most importantly, as Americans, with the duty to one another, to America, to the American people, to the Constitution, and an unwavering resolve that freedom will always triumph over tyranny. Thank you. 6 days ago, Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated. He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined. He met the Ukrainian people. And President Zelensky, to every Ukrainian, their fearlessness, their courage, their determination literally inspires the world. Groups of citizens blocking tanks with their bodies. Everyone from students to retirees to teachers turned soldiers defending their homeland. And in this struggle, President Zelensky said in his speech to the European Parliament, "Light will win over darkness." The Ukrainian ambassador to the United States is here tonight, sitting with the First Lady. Let each of us, if you're able to stand and send an unmistakable signal to the world of Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. bright, she's strong, and she's resolved. Yes. We, the United States of America, stand with the Ukrainian people. Throughout our history, we've learned this lesson. When dictators do not pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos. They keep moving, and the cost, the threats to America and America to the world keeps rising. That's why the NATO alliance was created, to secure peace and stability in Europe after World War II. The United States is a member, along with 29 other nations. It matters. American diplomacy matters. American resolve matters. Putin's latest attack on Ukraine was premeditated and totally unprovoked. He rejected repeated efforts at diplomacy. He thought the West and NATO wouldn't respond. He thought he could divide us at home, in this chamber, in this nation. He thought he could divide us in Europe as well. But Putin was wrong. We are ready. We are united, and that's what we did. We stayed united. We prepared extensively and carefully. We spent months building coalitions of other freedom-loving nations in Europe and the Americas, from America to the Asian and African continents, to confront Putin. Like many of you, I spent countless hours unifying our European allies. We shared with the world in advance what we knew Putin was planning and precisely how he would try to falsify and justify his aggression. We countered Russia's lies with the truth. And now that he's acted, the free world is holding him accountable, along with 27 members of the European Union, including France, Germany, Italy, as well as countries like the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and many others. Even Switzerland are inflicting pain on Russia and supporting the people of Ukraine. Putin is now isolated from the world more than he has ever been. Together, along with our allies, we are right now enforcing powerful economic sanctions. We're cutting off Russia's largest banks in the international financial system, preventing Russia's central bank from defending the Russian ruble, making Putin's $630 billion war fund worthless. We're choking Russia's access. To technology that will sap its economic strength and weaken its military for years to come. Tonight, I say to the Russian oligarchs and the corrupt leaders who built billions of dollars off this violent regime, no more. The United States, I mean it. The United States Department of Justice is assembling a dedicated task force to go after the crimes of the Russian oligarchs. We're joining with European allies to find and seize their yachts, their luxury apartments, their private jets. We're coming for your ill-begotten gains. And tonight, I'm announcing that we will join our allies in closing off American airspace to all Russian flights, further isolating Russia and adding additional squeeze on their economy. He has no idea what's coming. The ruble has already lost 30% of its value. The Russian stock market has lost 40% of its value, and trading remains suspended. The Russian economy is reeling, and Putin alone is the one to blame. Together with our allies, we're providing support to the Ukrainians in their fight for freedom. Military assistance, economic assistance, humanitarian assistance. We're giving more than $1 billion in direct assistance to Ukraine, and will continue to aid the Ukrainian people as they defend their country and help ease their suffering. clear. Our forces are not engaged and will not engage in the conflict with Russian forces in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies in the event that Putin decides to keep moving west. For that purpose, we have mobilized American ground forces, air squadrons, ship deployments to protect NATO countries including Poland, Romania, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And as I've made crystal clear, the United States and our allies will defend every inch of territory that is NATO territory with the full force of our collective power. Every single inch. And we're clear-eyed. The Ukrainians are fighting back with pure courage. But the next few days, weeks, and months will be hard on them. Putin has unleashed violence and chaos. But while he may make gains on the battlefield, he'll pay a continuing high price over the long run. And a pound of Ukrainian people, the proud, proud people, pound for pound, ready to fight with every inch of energy they have. They've known 30 years of independence, have repeatedly shown that they will not tolerate anyone who tries to take their country backwards. To all Americans, I'll be honest with you, as I always promised I would be. A Russian dictator invading a foreign country has cost around the world. And I'm taking robust action to make sure the pain of our sanctions is targeted at the Russian economy, and that we use every tool at our disposal to protect American businesses and consumers. Tonight, I can announce the United States has worked with 30 other countries to release 60 million barrels of oil from reserves around the world. America will lead that effort, releasing 30 million barrels of our own strategic petroleum reserve. And we stand ready to do more if necessary, united with our allies. These steps will help blunt gas prices here at home, but I know news about what's happening can seem alarming to all Americans. But I want you to know we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. When the history of this era is written, Putin's war in Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger. While it shouldn't have taken something so terrible for people around the world to see what's at stake, now everyone sees it clearly. We see the unity among leaders of nations, a more unified Europe, a more unified West. We see unity among the people who are gathering in cities and large crowds around the world, even in Russia, to demonstrate their support for the people of Ukraine. In the battle between democracy and autocracies, democracies are rising to the moment, and the world is clearly choosing the side of peace and security. This is the real test, and it's going to take time. So let us continue to draw inspiration from the iron will of the Ukrainian people. To our fellow Ukrainian Americans who forged the deep bond that connects our two nations, we stand with you. We stand with you. Putin may circle Kiev with tanks, but he'll never gain the hearts and souls of the Iranian people. He'll never extinguish their love of freedom, and he will never, never weaken the resolve of the free world. We meet tonight in an America that has lived through two of the hardest years this nation has ever faced. The pandemic has been punishing, and so many families are living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to keep up with the rising cost of food, gas, housing, and so much more. I understand, like many of you did. My dad had to leave his home in Scranton, Pennsylvania to find work. So like many of you, I grew up in a family when the price of food went up, it was felt throughout the family. It had an impact. That's when one of the first things I did as president was fight to pass the American Rescue Plan. Because people were hurting, we needed to act, and we did. Few pieces of legislation have done more at a critical moment in our history to lift us out of a crisis. It fueled our efforts to vaccinate the nation and combat COVID-19, delivered immediate economic relief to tens of millions of Americans. It helped put food on the table. Remember those long lines of cars waiting for hours just to get a box of food put in their trunk. It cut the cost of health care insurance. And as my dad used to say, it gave the people just a little bit of breathing room. Unlike the $2 trillion tax cut passed in the previous administration that benefited the top 1% of Americans, the American Rescue Plan helped working people and left no one behind. Folks, and it worked. It worked. It worked. We created jobs, lots of jobs. In fact, our economy created over 6.5 million new jobs just last year. More jobs in 1 year than ever before in the history of the United States of America. The economy grew at a rate of 5.7 last year, the strongest growth rate in 40 years. And the first step in bringing fundamental change to our economy that hasn't worked for working people in this nation for too long. For the past 40 years, we were told that tax break for those at the top and benefits would trickle down and everyone would benefit. But that trickle-down theory led to a weaker economic growth, lower wages, bigger deficits, and a widening gap between the top and everyone else in nearly a century. Look, Vice President Harris and I ran for office, and I realize we have fundamental disagreements on this, but ran for office with a new economic vision for America. Invest in America, educate Americans, grow the workforce, build the economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down, because we know, because we know when the middle class grows, the poor will way up and the wealthy do very well. America used to have the best roads, bridges, and airports on earth, and now our infrastructure is ranked 13th in the world. We won't be able to compete for the jobs of the 21st century if we don't fix it. That's why it was so important to pass the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I thank my Republican friends who joined to invest and rebuild America, the single biggest investment in history. It was a bipartisan effort, and I want to thank the members of both parties who worked to make it happen. We're done talking about infrastructure weeks. We're now talking about an infrastructure decade. And look, it's going to transform America, to put us on a path to win the economic competition of the 21st century that we face with the rest of the world, particularly China. I've told Xi Jinping it's never been a good bet to bet against the American people. We'll create good jobs for millions of Americans, modernizing roads, airports, ports, waterways, all across America. And we'll do it to withstand the devastating effects of climate change and promote environmental justice. We'll build a national network of 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations. Begin to replace the poisonous lead pipes so every child, every American has clean water to drink at home and at school. We're going to provide affordable, high-speed internet for every American, rural, suburban, urban, and tribal communities. 4,000 projects have already been announced. Many of you have announced them in your districts. And tonight, I'm announcing that this year, we will start fixing over 65,000 miles of highway and 1,500 bridges in disrepair. And folks, when we use taxpayers' dollars to rebuild America, we're going to do it by buying America. Buy American products. Support American jobs. The federal government spends about $600 billion a year to keep this country safe and secure. There's been a law on the books for almost a century to make sure taxpayers' dollars support American jobs and businesses. Every administration, Democrat or Republican, says they'll do it, but we're actually doing it. We'll buy America to make sure everything from the deck of an aircraft carrier to the steel on highway guardrails is made in America from beginning to end. All of it. All of it. But folks, to compete for the jobs of the future, we also need a level playing field with China and other competitors. That's why it's so important to pass the Bipartisan Innovation Act sitting in Congress that will make record investments in emerging technologies and American manufacturing. We used to invest almost 2% of our GDP in research and development. We don't now. China is. Let me give you one example why it's so important to pass. If you travel 20 miles east of Columbus, Ohio, you'll find 1,000 empty acres of land. It won't look like much, but if you stop and look closely, you'll see a field of dreams, the ground on which America's future will be built. That's where Intel, the American company that helped build Silicon Valley, is going to build a $20 billion semiconductor megasite, up to 8 state-of-the-art factories in one place, 10,000 new jobs. And in those factories, the average job about $135,000 a year. Some of the most sophisticated manufacturing in the world to make computer chips the size of a fingertip, the power of the world in everyday lives, from smartphones, technology, the internet, technology is yet to be invented. But that's just the beginning. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger, who is here tonight, I don't know where Pat is. Pat, there you go, Pat, stand up. Pat came to see me, and he told me they're ready to increase their investment from $20 billion to $100 billion. That would be the biggest investment in manufacturing in American history. And all they're waiting for is for you to pass this bill. So let's not wait any longer. Send it to my desk, I'll sign it, and we'll really take off in a big way. And folks, Intel is not alone. There's something happening in America. Just look around and you'll see an amazing story. The rebirth of pride that comes from stamping products made in America. The revitalization of American manufacturing. Companies are choosing to build new factories here when just a few years ago they would have gone overseas. That's what's happening. Ford is investing $11 billion in electric vehicles, creating 11,000 jobs across the country. GM is making the largest investment in its history, $7 billion to build electric vehicles, creating 4,000 jobs in Michigan. All told, 369,000 new manufacturing jobs were created in America last year alone. Folks, powered by people I've met like JoJo Burgess from generations of union steelworkers in Pittsburgh, who's here tonight. Where are you, JoJo? There you go. Thanks, buddy. As Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown says, it's time to bury the label Rust Belt. It's time to see what used to be called the Rust Belt become the home of a significant resurgence of manufacturing. And with all the bright spots in our economy, record job growth, higher wages. Too many families are struggling to keep up with their bills. Inflation is robbing them of gains they thought otherwise they would be able to feel. I get it. That's why my top priority is getting prices under control. Look, our economy roared back faster than almost anyone predicted, but the pandemic meant that businesses had a hard time hiring enough people because of the pandemic to keep up production in their factories. So you didn't have people making those beams that went into buildings because they were out. The factory was closed. The panic also disrupted the global supply chain. Factories close. When that happens, it takes longer to make goods and get them to the warehouses, to the stores, and prices go up. Look at cars last year. 1/3 of all the inflation was because of automobile sales. There weren't enough semiconductors to make all the cars that people wanted to buy. And guess what? Prices of automobiles went way up, especially used vehicles as well. And so we have a choice. One way to fight inflation is to drive down wages and make Americans poorer. I think I have a better idea to fight inflation. Lower your costs, not your wages. And folks, that means make more cars and semiconductors in America, more infrastructure and innovation in America, more goods moving faster and cheaper in America, more jobs where you can earn a good living in America. Instead of relying on foreign supply chains, let's make it in America. Look, economists call this increasing the productive capacity of our economy. I call it building a better America. My plan to fight inflation will lower your costs and lower the deficit. 17 Nobel laureates in economics said my plan will ease long-term inflationary pressures. Top business leaders, and I believe most Americans support the plan. And here's the plan. First, cut the cost of prescription drugs. We pay more for the same drug produced by the same company in America than any other country in the world. Just look at insulin. 1 in 10 Americans has diabetes. In Virginia, I met a 13-year-old boy, the handsome young man standing up there, Joshua Davis. He and his dad both have type 1 diabetes, which means they need insulin every single day. Insulin costs about $10 a vial to make. That's what it costs the pharmaceutical company. But drug companies charge families like Joshua and his dad up to 30 times that amount. I spoke with Joshua's mom. Imagine what it's like to look at your child who needs insulin to stay healthy and have no idea how in God's name you're going to be able to pay for it. What it does to your family, but what it does to your dignity, your ability to look your child in the eye, to be the parent you expect yourself to be. I really mean to think about that. That's what I think about. You know, yesterday, Joshua's here tonight, but yesterday was his birthday. Happy birthday, buddy, by the way. For Joshua and 200,000 other young people with type 1 diabetes, let's cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month so everyone can afford it. And drug companies will do very, very well, their profit margin. While we're at it, I know we have great disagreements on this floor with this. Let's let Medicare negotiate the price of prescription drugs. They already set the price for VA drugs. Look, the American Rescue Plan is helping millions of families with Affordable Care Act plans to save them $2,400 a year on their health premiums. Let's close the coverage gap and make these savings permanent. And second, let's cut energy costs for families, an average of $500 a year by combating climate change. Let's provide an investment tax credits to weatherize your home and your business, to be energy efficient and get a tax credit for it. Double America's clean energy production in solar, wind, and so much more. Lower the price of electric vehicles, saving another $80 a month that you're not going to have to pay at the pump. Folks, the third thing we can do to change the standard of living for hardworking folks is cut the cost of child care. Cut the cost of child care. Folks, if you live in a major city in America, you pay up to $14,000 a year for child care per child. I was a single dad for 5 years, raising 2 kids. I had a lot of help, though. I had a mom, a dad, a brother, and a sister that really helped. But middle class and working folks shouldn't have to pay more than 7% of their income to care for the young children. My plan would cut the cost of child care in half for most families and help parents, including millions of women who left the workforce during the pandemic because they couldn't afford child care, to be able to get back to work, generating economic growth. But my plan doesn't stop there. It also includes home and long-term care, more affordable housing, pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds. All these will lower costs to families. And under my plan, nobody, let me say this again, nobody earning less than $400,000 a year will pay an additional penny in new taxes. Not a single penny. I may be wrong, but my guess is if we took a secret ballot in this floor, that we'd all agree that the present tax system ain't fair. We have to fix it. I'm not looking to punish anybody, but let's make corporations and wealthy Americans start paying their fair share. Look, last year, and like Chris Coons and Tom Carper and my distinguished Congresswoman, we come from the land of corporate America. There are more corporations incorporated in America than every other state in America combined. And I still won 36 years in a row. The point is, even they understand they should pay just a fair share. Last year, 55 of the Fortune 500 companies earned $40 billion in profit and paid 0 in federal taxes. Now look, it's not fair. That's why I proposed a 15% minimum tax rate for corporations. And that's why in the G7 and other meetings overseas, we're able to put together, I was able to be somewhat helpful, 130 countries agree on a global minimum tax rate. So companies can't get out of paying their taxes at home by shipping jobs and factories overseas. It'll raise billions of dollars. That's why I propose closing loopholes for the very wealthy who pay a lower tax rate than a teacher and a firefighter. So that's my plan, but we have to go in more detail later. We will grow the economy, lower the cost of families. So what are we waiting for? Let's get this done. We all know we've got to make changes. Folks, and while you're at it, confirm my nominees for the Federal Reserve, which plays a critical role in fighting inflation. My plan will not only lower costs and give families a fair shot, it will lower the deficit. The previous administration not only ballooned the deficit with those tax cuts for the very wealthy and corporations, it undermined the watchdogs, the job of those to keep pandemic relief funds being wasted. Remember we had those debates? But whether or not those watchdogs should be able to see every day how much money was being spent, where was it going to the right place? But in my administration, the watchdogs are back. And we're going to go after the criminals who stole billions of relief money meant for small business and millions of Americans. Tonight, I'm announcing that the Justice Department will soon name a chief prosecutor for pandemic fraud. And look, I think we all agree, thank you. By the end of this year, the deficit will be down to less than half of what it was before I took office. The only president ever to cut the deficit by more than $1 trillion in a single year. Lowering your cost also meant demanding more competition. I'm a capitalist, but capitalism without competition is not capitalism. Capitalism without competition is exploitation. It drives up profits. And corporations have to compete. Their profits go up and your prices go up when they don't have to compete. Small businesses and family farmers and ranchers, I need not tell some of my Republican friends from those states. Guess what? You got 4 basic meat packing facilities. That's it. You play with them or you don't get to play at all. And you pay a hell of a lot more. A hell of a lot more because there's only 4. See what's happening with ocean carriers and moving goods in and out of America. During the pandemic, about half a dozen or less foreign-owned companies raised prices by as much as 1,000% and made record profits. Tonight, I'm announcing a crackdown on those companies overcharging American businesses and consumers. And folks, and as Wall Street firms take over more nursing homes, quality in those homes has gone down and costs have gone up. That ends on my watch. Medicare is going to set higher standards for nursing homes and make sure your loved ones get the care they deserve and that they inspect and they will look at closely. We're also going to cut costs to keep the economy going strong and giving workers a fair shot, provide more training and apprenticeships, hire them based on skills, not just their degrees. Let's pass the Paycheck Fairness Act and paid leave. Raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour and extend the child tax credit so no one has to raise a family in poverty. Let's increase Pell Grants, increase our historic support for HBCUs, and invest in what Jill, our First Lady who teaches full-time, calls America's best-kept secret, community colleges. Look, let's pass the PRO Act. When a majority of workers want to form a union, they shouldn't be able to be stopped. When we invest in our workers and we build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out together, we can do something we haven't done in a long time. Build a better America. For more than 2 years, COVID has impacted every decision in our lives and the life of this nation. And I know you're tired, frustrated, and exhausted. That doesn't even count the close to 1 million people who sit at a dining room table or a kitchen table and look at an empty chair because they lost somebody. But I also know this, because of the progress we've made, because of your resilience and the tools that we have been provided by this Congress, tonight I can say we're moving forward safely back to more normal routines. We've reached a new moment in the fight against COVID-19, where severe cases are down to a level not seen since July of last year. Just a few days ago, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention issued a new mask guidelines. Under the new guidelines, most Americans and most of the country can now go mask-free. And based on projections, more of the country will reach a point across the next couple of weeks. And thanks to the progress we've made in the past year, COVID-19 no longer need control our lives. I know some are talking about living with COVID-19, but tonight I say that we never will just accept living with COVID-19. We'll continue to combat the virus as we do other diseases. And because this virus mutates and spreads, we have to stay on guard. And here are 4 common sense steps as we move forward safely, in my view. First, stay protected with vaccines and treatments. We know how incredibly effective vaccines are. If you're vaccinated and boosted, you have the highest degree of protection. And we'll never give up on vaccinating more Americans. Now, I know parents with kids under 5 are eager to see their vaccines authorized for their children. Scientists are working hard to get that done. We'll be ready with plenty of vaccines if and when they do. We're all ready. We are also ready with antiviral treatments. If you get COVID-19, the Pfizer pill reduces your chances of ending up in the hospital by 90%. I've ordered more pills than anyone in the world has. Pfizer's working overtime to get us 1 million pills this month and more than double that next month. And now we're launching the Test to Treat initiative. So people can get tested at a pharmacy, and if they prove positive, receive the antiviral pills on the spot at no cost. And folks, if you're immunocompromised or have some other vulnerability, we have treatments and free high-quality masks. We're leaving no one behind or ignoring anyone's needs as we move forward. On testing, we've made hundreds of millions of tests available, and you can order them for free to your doorstep. And we've already ordered free tests. If you already ordered free tests tonight, I'm announcing you can order another group of tests. Go to covidtest.gov starting next week, and you can get more tests. Second, we must prepare for new variants. Over the past, we've gotten much better at detecting new variants. If necessary, we'll be able to develop new vaccines within 100 days instead of maybe months or years. And if Congress provides the funds we need, we'll have new stockpiles of tests, masks, pills ready if needed. I can't promise a new variant won't come, but I can promise you we'll do everything within our power to be ready if it does. Third, we can end the shutdown of schools and businesses. We have the tools we need. It's time for America to get back to work and fill our great downtowns again with people. People working from home can feel safe and begin to return to their offices. We're doing that here in the federal government. The vast majority of federal workers will once again work in person. Our schools are open. Let's keep it that way. Our kids need to be in school. With 75% of adult Americans fully vaccinated and hospitalizations down by 77%, most Americans can remove their masks and stay in the classroom and move forward safely. We achieved this because we provided free vaccines, treatments, tests, and masks. Of course, continuing this costs money, so I'll not surprise you. I'll be back to see you all. And I'm going to soon send a request to Congress. The vast majority of Americans have used these tools and may want again. We may need them again, so I expect Congress, and I hope you'll pass that quickly. Fourth, we'll continue vaccinating the world. We've sent 475 million vaccine doses to 112 countries, more than any nation on earth. We won't stop because you can't build a wall high enough to keep out a vaccine. The vaccine can stop the spread of these diseases. You know, we've lost so much in COVID-19. Time with one another. The worst of all, much the loss of life. Let's use this moment to reset. So stop looking at COVID as a partisan dividing line. See it for what it is, a god-awful disease. Let's stop seeing each other as enemies and start seeing each other for who we are, fellow Americans. Look. We can't change how divided we've been. It was a long time in coming. But we can change how to move forward on COVID-19 and other issues that we must face together. I recently visited New York City Police Department days after the funerals of Officer Wilbur Mora and his partner, Officer Jason Rivera. They were responding to a 9/11 call when a man shot and killed them with a stolen gun. Officer Mora was 27 years old. Officer Rivera was 22 years old. Both Dominican Americans who grew up in the same streets that they later chose to patrol as police officers. I spoke with their families, and I told them they were forever in debt for their sacrifices and will carry on their mission to restore the trust and safety of every community deserves. Like some of you that have been around for a while, I've worked with you on these issues for a long time. I know what works. Investigating crime prevention and community policing, cops who walk the beat, who know the neighborhood, and who can restore trust and safety. Let's not abandon our streets or choose between safety and equal justice. Let's come together and protect our communities, restore trust, and hold law enforcement accountable. That's why the Justice Department has required body cameras, banned chokeholds, and restricted no-knock warrants for its officers. That's why the American Rescue Plan that you all provided $350 billion that cities, states, and counties can use to hire more police, invest in more proven strategies. Proven strategies like community violence interruption, trusted messengers, breaking the cycle of violence and trauma, and giving young people some hope. We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police, it's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them. Fund them with resources and training. Resources and training they need to protect our communities. I ask Democrats and Republicans alike to pass my budget and keep our neighborhoods safe. And we'll do everything in my power to crack down on gun trafficking of ghost guns that you can buy online, assemble at home, no serial numbers, can't be traced. I ask Congress to pass proven measures to reduce gun violence. Pass universal background checks. Why should anyone on the terrorist list be able to purchase a weapon? Why? Why? And folks, ban assault weapons with high-capacity magazines that hold up to 100 rounds. You think the deer are wearing Kevlar vests? Look, repeal the liability shield that makes gun manufacturers the only industry in America that can't be sued. The only one. Imagine had we done that with the tobacco manufacturers. These laws don't infringe on the Second Amendment. They save lives. The most fundamental right in America is the right to vote and have it counted. And look, it's under assault. In state after state, new laws have been passed. Not only to suppress the vote, we've been there before, but to subvert the entire election. We can't let this happen. Tonight I call on the Senate to pass the Freedom to Vote Act, pass the John Lewis Act, Voting Rights Act. And while you're at it, pass the Disclose Act so Americans know who's funding our election. Look, tonight, I like to honor someone who dedicated his life to serve this country. Justice Breyer, an Army veteran, constitutional scholar, retiring Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Justice Breyer, thank you for your service. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean it. Get up, stand, let them see you. Thank you. And we all know, no matter what your ideology, we all know one of the most serious constitutional responsibility a president has is nominating someone to serve on the United States Supreme Court. As I did 4 days ago, I've nominated the Circuit Court of Appeals, Ketanji Brown Jackson, one of our nation's top legal minds, who continue in Justice Breyer's legacy of excellence. A former top litigator in private practice, a former federal public defender, from a family of public school educators and police officers. She's a consensus builder. Since she's been nominated, she's received a broad range of support, including the Fraternal Order of Police and former judges supported by Democrats and Republicans. Folks, if we're to advance liberty and justice, we need to secure our border and fix the immigration system. And as you might guess, I think we can do both. At our border, we've installed new technology like cutting-edge scanners to better detect drug smuggling. We've set up joint patrols with Mexico and Guatemala to catch more human traffickers. We're putting in place dedicated immigration judges, a significant larger number, so families fleeing persecution and violence can have their cases heard faster, and those who don't legitimately hear can be sent back. We're screening, we're securing commitments, and supporting partners in South and Central America to host more refugees and secure their own borders. We can do all this while keeping lit the torch of liberty that has led a generation of immigrants to this land, my forebears and many of yours. Provide a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, those with temporary status, farm workers, essential workers. Revise our laws so businesses have workers they need and families don't wait decades to reunite. It's not only the right thing to do, it's economically smart thing to do. That's why the immigration reform is supported by everyone from labor unions to religious leaders to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Let's get it done once and for all. Folks, advancing liberty and justice also requires protecting the rights of women. The constitutional right affirmed by Roe v. Wade, standing precedent for half a century, is under attack as never before. If you want to go forward, not backwards, we must protect access to health care, preserve a woman's right to choose, and continue to advance maternal health care for all Americans. And folks, for our LGBTQ plus Americans, let's finally get the Bipartisan Equality Act to my desk. The onslaught of state laws targeting transgender Americans and their families, it's simply wrong. And I said last year, especially to our younger transgender Americans, I'll always have your back as your president so you can be yourself and reach your God-given potential. Folks, as I've just demonstrated, while it often appears we do not agree, and that we do agree on a lot more things than we acknowledge. I signed 80 bipartisan bills into law last year, from preventing government shutdowns, to protecting Asian Americans from still too common hate crimes, to reforming military justice, and will soon be strengthening the Violence Against Women Act that I first wrote 3 decades ago. It's important. It's important for us to show the nation we can come together and do big things. So tonight I'm offering a unity agenda for the nation. 4 big things we can do together, in my view. First, beat the opioid epidemic. There's so much we can do. Increase funding for prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and recovery. Get rid of outdated rules and stop doctors prescribing treatments. Stop the flow of illicit drugs by working with state and local law enforcement to go after the traffickers. And if you're suffering from addiction, you should know you're not alone. I believe in recovery, and I celebrate the 23 million Americans in recovery. Second, let's take on mental health, especially among our children whose lives and education have been turned upside down. The American Rescue Plan gave schools money to hire teachers and help students make up for lost learning. I urge every parent to make sure your school does just that. They have the money. We can all play a part. Sign up to be a tutor or a mentor. Children were also struggling before the pandemic: bullying, violence, trauma, and the harms of social media. As Frances Haugen, who is here tonight with us, has shown, we must hold social media platforms accountable for the national experiment they're conducting on our children for profit. Folks, thank you. Thank you for the courage you showed. It's time to strengthen privacy protections, ban targeted advertising to children, demand tech companies stop collecting personal data on our children, and let's get all Americans the mental health services they need. More people can turn for help and full parity between physical and mental health care if we treat it that way in our insurance. Look, the third piece of that agenda is support our veterans. Veterans are the backbone and the spine of this country. They're the best of us. I've always believed that we have a sacred obligation to equip those we send to war and care for those in their family when they come home. My administration is providing assistance in job training, housing, and now helping lower-income veterans get VA care debt-free. And our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan have faced many dangers, one being stationed at bases breathing in toxic smoke from burn pits. Many of you have been there. I've been in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan over 40 times. These burn pits that incinerate waste, the waste of war, medical and hazardous material, jet fuel, and so much more. And they come home, many of the world's fittest and best trained warriors in the world, never the same. Headaches, numbness, dizziness, a cancer that would put them in a flag-draped coffin. I know. One of those soldiers was my son, Major Bo Biden. I don't know for sure if the burn pit that he lived near, that his hooch was near in Iraq and earlier than that in Kosovo, is the cause of his brain cancer, the disease of so many other troops. But I am committed to find out everything we can, committed to military families like Danielle Robinson from Ohio, the widow of Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson. He was born a soldier, Army National Guard, combat medic in Kosovo and Iraq, stationed near Baghdad, just yards from burn pits the size of football fields. Danielle is here with us tonight. They love going to Ohio State football games. And they love building Legos with their daughter. But cancer from prolonged exposure to burn pits ravaged Heath's lungs and body. Danielle says Heath was a fighter to the very end. He didn't know how to stop fighting, and neither did she. Through her pain, she found purpose to demand that we do better. Tonight, Danielle, we are going to do better. The VA is pioneering new ways of linking toxic exposure to disease, already helping more veterans get benefits. And tonight, I'm announcing we're expanding eligibility to veterans suffering from 9 respiratory cancers. I'm also calling on Congress to pass a law to make sure veterans devastated by toxic exposure in Iraq and Afghanistan finally get the benefits and the comprehensive health care they deserve. fourth and last, let's end cancer as we know it. This is personal. This is personal to me and to Jill and to Kamala and so many of you. So many of you have lost someone you love. Husband, wife, son, daughter, mom, dad. Cancer is the #2 cause of death in America, second only to heart disease. Last month, I announced the plan to supercharge the cancer moonshot that President Obama asked me to lead 6 years ago. Our goal is to cut cancer death rates by at least 50% over the next 25 years. I think we can do better than that. Turn cancers from death sentences into treatable diseases. More support for patients and their families. To get there, I call on Congress to fund what I called ARPA-H, Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, patterned after DARPA and the Defense Department. Projects that led in DARPA to the internet, GPS, and so much more to make our forces more safer and be able to wage war with more clarity. ARPA will have a singular purpose: to drive breakthroughs in cancer, Alzheimer's and diabetes, and more. A unity agenda for the nation. We can do these things. It's within our power, and I don't see a partisan edge to any one of those 4 things. My fellow Americans, tonight, we've gathered in this sacred space, a citadel of democracy, in this Capitol. Generation after generation of Americans have debated great questions amid great strife and have done great things. We fought for freedom, expanded liberty, debated totalitarianism and terror. We built the strongest, freest, and most prosperous nation the world has ever known. Now is the hour, our moment of responsibility, our test of resolve and conscience, of history itself. It is in this moment that our character of this generation is formed. Our purpose is found. Our future is forged. Well, I know this nation. We'll meet the test, protect freedom and liberty, expand fairness and opportunity, and we will save democracy. As hard as those times have been, I'm more optimistic about America today than I've been my whole life, because I see the future that's within our grasp, because I know there's simply nothing beyond our capacity. We're the only nation on earth that has always turned every crisis we've faced into an opportunity. The only nation that can be defined by a single word: possibilities. So on this night, on our 245th year as a nation, I've come to report on the state of the nation, the State of the Union. And my report is this: the State of the Union is strong because you, the American people, are strong. We are stronger today. We are stronger today than we were a year ago. And we'll be stronger a year from now than we are today. This is our moment to meet and overcome the challenges of our time. And we will, as one people, one America, the United States of America. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you. Go get him.
President Biden speaking for a little over an hour in his first State of the Union speech, spending about the first 10 or 11 minutes talking about the situation in Ukraine and the American-led coalition of countries that have stood up to Vladimir Putin. But what we saw just a few minutes ago, about 6 minutes near the end of the speech, we heard an interruption in the crowd. A member of Congress, I want to go to NBC News senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haake, who's inside the chamber. What was that we heard as the president was beginning to talk about his late son, Beau?
Yeah, Lester, that was Republican Lauren Boebert from Colorado. As the president was talking about warriors in flag-draped coffins, she interjected 13 of them, I believe, a reference to the American servicemen and men who were killed in Afghanistan during the withdrawal. She and Marjorie Taylor Greene, another Republican freshman, kept up something of a running commentary throughout much of the speech, interjecting in segments about immigration and segments about COVID, jumping up and clearly audible commentary, even as far away as I am upstairs in the gallery.
And it sounded like some were trying to shush her.
Yeah, there was definitely a reaction. They're only a few seats away from the aisle, the center aisle of the chamber that separates the Democrats from the Republicans. There was definitely a significant reaction from those who heard her jumping in. Not entirely clear where it was coming from, but clearly an unwelcome interruption from most of the other folks in the chamber. Lester.
Garrett, thank you.
We want to turn to NBC's chief White House correspondent, Peter Alexander, who's been listening to this speech. It felt like the top of the speech was a rewrite in light of pressing events happening on the world stage, but then the remainder of it went along as most State of the Union addresses do, a laundry list of goals and aspirations and pressing lawmakers to pass his initiatives. What was your take, Peter?
Yeah, Savannah, that was my take. This really did feel like two different speeches. The first 15 minutes in many ways seemed like they were written for this moment, the U.S. and its allies overseas teaming up together in this fight against tyranny, against autocracy, against Vladimir Putin in support of the Ukrainian people. It was about as much bipartisan applause as you've seen in a chamber like that in a couple decades, dating back perhaps to the months and years that followed 9/11. The president saying of Vladimir Putin, he has no idea what's coming. But what surprised me is how quickly he then pivoted to the domestic agenda, and in many ways sort of revisiting a lot of the topics that are litigated on a daily basis here in Washington, D.C., sort of recasting the Build Back Better plan as an effort to build a better America, but still detailing a lot of the same policies that have been stalled on Capitol Hill. The president did rebrand another slogan that was harmful to Democrats in the last election, the defund the police line, saying fund the police. But again, my biggest takeaway was on this night where it really felt like there was a moment, the potential to bring all of these Americans, all of these lawmakers together in this moment where the world is really watching, that the president focused on that only very briefly before moving on. I was struck by his final words as well. Before he left the podium, the president said, "Go get him." Unclear to whom he was referring there. Was that about Vladimir Putin or who else? I think in some ways I anticipate it might be more of an Oval Office type of address about foreign policy, but did become as much a laundry list as anything else after that.
Peter, thanks very much. It felt like a split-screen moment, not a literal one, but certainly that first 11 minutes as the president was talking about Ukraine, the imagery in our minds that we have all seen as he spoke about what was happening there. I want to go to Kiev, Ukraine now, where our chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel is standing by. Richard?
So Ukrainians will be very flattered by what they heard. There was a lot of blue and yellow in the crowds, the colors of the Ukrainian flag, honoring the ambassador, celebrating the heroism of the Ukrainian resistance. It is something that Ukrainians themselves are very proud of. It is something that they are talking about a great deal. They themselves are quite pleased with the fact that they have been able to literally stand up and block convoys of Russian tanks. And that is happening more and more. As Russian troops pour into this country, the fellow Slavs, because both the Ukrainians and Russians are Slavs, that the Russians are not only having their convoys slowed down because of technical difficulties, lack of fuel and lack of food and logistical problems, but in some cases, the Ukrainians will go up to those armored vehicles, young and old, and confront the Russian soldiers themselves and say, "Don't shoot." And the Russians are having moments of pause. So all of that will be very welcome and well received here in Kiev. The problem is you didn't hear a great deal of new information, not any major new sanctions, and not the kinds of specific help that the Ukrainians are asking for. Just a short time before President Biden gave the State of the Union, President Zelensky said quite clearly that without more help, the Ukrainian military, as hard as it fights, isn't going to be able to take on Russia by itself, especially as Russia changes gears and moves away from small unit tactics, precision strikes, to full-on siege warfare, with this city, Kiev, being the most likely next target.
All right, Richard, you and your team continue to be safe.
And we want to turn now to our chief Washington correspondent, Andrea Mitchell, and Chuck Todd, who is here with me. Chuck, do you feel, when we look back at this speech in history and the moment that we are in, not just as a nation, but the world?
Yeah.
I mean, the president framed it, democracy versus autocracy. He said this is a real test. Did it meet the moment in terms of, the real good versus evil struggle that is unfolding, half a world away right now?
Let me put it this way. In some ways, for the sake of the Ukrainians, I hope we don't say it didn't, I hope we say, oh, it was about right. But I fear this is going to feel like a speech that didn't age well because of the lack of, I thought he'd spend more time in Ukraine, spend a little more time explaining why it is our fight. As you said, good versus evil, explain what a little bit more, and a little bit of the history of the defense of Europe, and a little bit of why we're in this position, why we have these alliances, what it all means. And it just felt like an abrupt end after the 12 minutes of that. And it felt like, boy, we could have had more. There was more to say. I think there was more that the public would have. And then it turned, look, I do think he accomplished two important pieces of politics. Saying the phrases, secure our borders and fund our police. There are a lot of vulnerable Democrats and a lot of House and Senate races that are relieved to hear the leader of the Democratic Party say those two phrases. But that's the politics of this. You're asking about Ukraine, it certainly didn't, it felt to me like it could have had a lot more.
Andrea, there was no reassurance when the president was talking about Ukraine. We heard a few days ago Vladimir Putin raise the specter of putting his forces on nuclear alert, recognizing that's a sensitive ground for the president to go on. But were you surprised that there wasn't a reassurance to the American people that we are going to be okay through this?
Well, I think the calculus there is, we're told, the president wants to de-emphasize that threat twice now from Vladimir Putin just in the last few days, because he doesn't want to respond to it. He did not do what he could have done, which was to raise the alert on American nuclear forces, equivalent to what Putin had done. That would be an anticipated response. Instead, he's trying to almost ignore it because he wants to de-emphasize it, de-escalate as they can. But to the point of not explaining the stakes, we're not in this, but we are going to have to make some sacrifices, and it's tied to inflation. And he could have done a much better job of explaining why we care, of broadening that conversation about democracy versus autocracies, and describing what we face with Vladimir Putin, describing what the irrationality is of his positions about Ukraine, why we should care about this country so much. So you had the pageantry, you had the flags, you had the colors, the Ukrainian ambassador, but not explaining why we're not on the ground there, because we may have to get involved in a counterinsurgency outside the borders. And frankly, if we don't get those supplies, we're now $1 billion in terms of getting aid to them. Some said too little, too late. But it's a contested airspace. If we don't get that through that land border on the Polish side, on the western side.
That's right. It's one thing to promise it, but to deliver it where it's needed is a challenge.
Yeah, once they encircle Kiev, as they have Kharkiv, they're not going to be able to get that stuff delivered. They've got to do it in the next 10 days, is the best military analysis.
It felt like it was symbolically satisfying. There was those moments, a very moving moment when the entire House chamber stood for the ambassador from Ukraine, and there was a sea of blue and yellow. But when you get down to brass tacks, the president made clear, we're not sending boots on the ground. He did say, actually, we're going to be okay. But then he said, Ukraine, these are going to be tough days for Ukraine. And he made clear he would defend NATO territory, but it left open what of Ukraine,
even the
what
end of
of
the
those
speech,
people surrounded right now.
By the way, the end of the speech was clearly speaking to the larger, this is what makes us a great democracy. Boy, I think we were all waiting for it to be tied exactly, and then I think we were all waiting for this to frankly be a Ukraine sandwich, and then it didn't land there a little bit. I mean, and so again, I think we're all saying the same thing. I think we all expected a little bit more. I think we're all fearing that the next week is going to be just horrifying as we see a cornered Vladimir Putin do some perhaps crimes against humanity in order to try to get.
There are questions about what the point of the sanctions are. What's the action that you expect? Clearly, he's not turning.
And I think
he had an opportunity to basically be a professor tonight a little bit and tell the American people, we try fireside chat, whatever historical metaphor you want to have. And I think he would have I think he had a public that was ready to hear more.
And ask for some sacrifice and explain why we're going to need to sacrifice. I also think there was a strange moment at the end where he said, go get him. That was audible to the audience, and we're not quite sure what he means. I think he's talking about Vladimir Putin and the bad guys over there, but it was an ad lib that kind of
normally his close is God bless
and
our
that was
soldiers.
I think he was trying to buck up America and say, we're strong, the State of the Union is strong, get out there and, remember that we are strong as Americans.
By the way, his COVID messaging was very strong. I think that was a moment where it seemed to get everybody and keep masks on. So I thought he did some good.
And he avoided the claim of victory.
Correct. I thought that was a well-crafted portion of the speech.
Well, it is interesting to see how, whether it's the COVID messaging, the funding of police, the border wall, there did seem, Lester, to be an overt effort to reposition the Democratic message more in the middle, because obviously they're looking at the same polls, and they see that the midterm elections are upon us, and all indications are that the Democrats are not going to do well, to put it kindly.
And by the way, this is his comfort zone. I covered him when I was the congressional correspondent. Look at the way he is mingling, staying, more so than any other president, because he is so happy to be back in this joint session and in the House.
We want to go into Chief White House correspondent Kristen Welker and get her initial thoughts on what we just heard. Kristen?
Well, Lester, I'm getting mixed reaction hearing from some Democrats to this speech. Some Democrats texting me saying that exactly as you're discussing right now, they felt as though the section on Ukraine was strong, but they wanted to hear more of it. They think that this moment is critical for this president to really seize the leadership mantle, to have really made that case, the argument for why this is a battle for democracies. And they feel as though they wish he had sort of given that a little bit more time, a little bit more space to breathe. On the other hand, I'm also hearing from Democrats, including those on Capitol Hill, who say, look, this to some extent will help with a roadmap into the midterms. Savannah, exactly what you're talking about, the fact that Democrats are facing real headwinds heading into the midterm elections. And what we heard tonight was a robust argument for the Biden agenda, for the moderate Democratic agenda. He talked about the need not only for his social programs, lowering things like health care costs, but also passing reform on gun control and pro-choice as well. So those are the types of messages I think the Democrats will take from this speech onto the campaign trail. But again, a mixed reaction tonight because this was such a pivotal moment for this president and frankly for his party as well, Lester.
All right, Kristen, thanks.
Well, the Republican response will be delivered by Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds. We'll hear it in a few moments. And for more on that, let's bring in NBC senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson. And we can expect, Hallie, that the Republican response will focus on some of those hot-button issues, such as parenting, school choice.
That's right.
Crime, some of that laundry list of items that, at least in some of the political races we've seen here in the interim, for example, the Virginia governor's race, have been quite potent for Republicans.
And they expect that to continue as we head into the midterms, Savannah. We're talking about, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds here, a grandmother of 11 who will weave in some of her biography as she prepares to deliver the biggest speech of her political career. And you're right, we expected to focus. I've been on the phone with folks in Iowa, including those close to her, familiar with her remarks. She's going to focus largely in a couple of buckets, COVID and the economy. And this is all about contrast. Her mission and the mission of Republicans in this response is to highlight how their leadership in states like Iowa on these two issues has been different from the Biden administration's. Keep in mind that Iowa was one of the first states to get kids back in classes about a year ago. They had resisted in the initial days of the pandemic moving into a lockdown status. You've got that piece of the pandemic response. Governor Reynolds among the Republican governors leading these red states, these states where people largely went for former President Trump on that front. You also have the economic bucket. I expect, for example, that she will likely reference the fact that just today in Iowa, she signed a bill into state law that would do tax reform, essentially, implement a new tax rate for Iowans. She will go after him, I expect, on inflation for President Biden. That is a talking point we have heard from Republicans around the country because many of them believe that the economic messaging and talking about how much people are paying and what kind of money is in their wallet will be really effective come November. You have to keep in mind, too, that the response to any State of the Union can be, in the words of one source I talked to today, kind of thankless. If you do it well, people tend not to remember, and they do remember if you do it poorly. But that is the needle that she is going to thread, and I expect you to see some of those big themes from her tonight, Savannah.
All right, Hallie, thank you.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the Republican response to President Biden's State of the Union address from Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds. Our coverage continues after this. There were residents who hung on for dear life. I've heard people say the town is gone. Do you see it that way?
Absolutely not. We've lost some houses, but our community's still here.
We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weekdays